So in this video, I'm going to use my template to prepare my fabric. So when I say my fabric, I'm talking about my black drill, which is my base fabric. Now, you know, with the brief, you have a choice of white cotton drill or black cotton drill, and I've chosen black. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut this out on the solid line. So I've cut out my template along the solid line. Now there are two lines on this template. We've got a dotted line and we've got a solid line. Now the dotted line indicates the finished size of the pencil case, and the solid line indicates the seam allowance. So when your pencil case is actually stitched together, this edge here will be folded in as the seam allowance. Now I need to have a look at my fabric. So to do the next step, you'll need a pair of fabric scissors and a pin cushion and your chosen base fabric. So here I have my cotton drill. Now we use cotton drill when we did our little sample and the applique sample, and we know there's a right and wrong side. So the right side has that kind of diagonal weave and the wrong side is kind of just plain looking. Now there are a couple things to consider when cutting out fabric. One is, how can I reduce waste? Okay, so we want to be able to decrease the amount of rubbish we put in landfill as much as possible. And the other thing is, we need to cut it out with the grain of the fabric. Now what that means is fabric, this woven fabric is woven using two lots of threads, and they run parallel to the selvage, which is this finished edge, and perpendicular to the selvage, so at a right angle to this finished edge. Now every roll of fabric, you can see this is a roll of fabric, has the selvage. So we'll have one here and then it will have one at this end, but this is actually being cut. I don't know if you can see that. So it will be up the other end. Now for my template, I need to cut out two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the fabric so I have two layers. And then I'm going to use my template, I'm going to place it on top, pin and cut out. But looking at this, there's going to be a lot of wastage here on the sides. So I want to just readjust my fabric a little bit to reduce the amount of wastage. That's a little bit better. Now when I was talking about the grain line, we're going to use either the dotted line or the solid line as a guide, and that needs to be parallel to either the selvage or perpendicular to the selvage. So that one there is at a right angle to the selvage, which is the finished edge. Now we're not going to cut out, like I don't want that finished edge on my fabric, so I've placed my template just a little bit higher than that. So just a reminder, we've got two layers. We've got our template as our pattern piece, and we're going to pin that so the pins are parallel to the edge. And when you pin, you go in. I use my hand underneath to push the fabric down and the pin back out and out. So we're pinning close to the edge so it holds the fabric there when we cut it out. So I put in 6 pins, that should be enough, and then I can cut this out. So long cutting strokes along the edge of that solid line. Try and get as close as you can. You can see I'm keeping this nice and flat on the cutting table while I do it. Okay, so I've cut it out. Now what I need to do is take my pins out. I can put this to one side, and then I'm going to work out which is the right and wrong side. So remembering the right side has that diagonal weave, so that's the wrong side. And I'm going to put, using tailor's chalk, a big cross on there because I don't want to put my applique on the wrong side of the fabric. Now hang on to this because you'll need this again to cut out your lining fabric. Next thing I'm going to do on that wrong side is I'm going to mark my seam allowance line. So this line here, and that is 1.5 from the edge. So on each edge I'm going to mark 1.5. Now if you were doing white fabric you could do this with a lead pencil, but if you're doing dark fabric you need to do it with chalk because it won't show up. Continue all the way around, marking your 1.5 and then ruling your lines. Okay, so I've marked those lines on the wrong side. They're going to aid me for when I stitch this around in the construction. Now you need to remember that your design should sit in the middle here. So if you feel like you need to, you could mark your 1.5 lines on the right side of the fabric to ensure you get your design in that box. If not, just keep an eye on it to make sure you're not putting your design in the seam allowance area. Now what you're going to do is repeat that process with your lining fabric. Now for your lining fabric, we're going to use scrap fabrics that we have in the classroom that are big enough for our lining. Now it's a little bit hard to work out the grain line on this, but if you look close up, you can see threads running this way and threads running that way. And we just put our template against that grain line. Now this fabric's actually been ripped. Now when you cut and rip fabric, it will rip along that grain line anyway. Now because I'm using scrap, I don't need to worry too much about wastage, especially with these small pieces. If it's a big piece, you still need to try and get it in a corner somewhere so you don't waste too much. So again, I've got my two layers. I've got my template here. I'm going to put it up in a corner and I'm going to pin it and cut that out. So I'm just going to cut that out now. Okay, so I've cut out my lining fabric. Take my pins out. And then I've got to work out the right and wrong side. So this one's quite easy because it's printed. I know the wrong side, that print isn't as vibrant. So then I can mark my 1.5 line along these pieces. Okay, so I've marked my 1.5 line on the wrong side. Now I'm ready to prepare my applique.